Let's get started. I hope you're having a good Friday and we're wrapping up the week. I know that a lot of you are probably getting to work and making progress with regard to the first essay assignment. So I'll try to make today's meeting a little bit shorter. It's Friday. Give you some time to continue to work through and start to prep and think about this assignment coming up. Let's get started on some of the things we want to go over for today. What I want you to do is take a little bit of time to write down and just talk a little bit about the progress that you've been making for this first essay assignment. I just want you to write or type on your own the current progress that you've made toward this essay assignment, the things that you still need to work on or to complete at this stage. And then lastly, if you have questions about this assignment or how to complete this assignment that we can talk through in class, you're welcome to think through those, and I'm happy to answer them for you in just a few minutes. Do a minute or two to finish up your observations here. And this is just a chance to do a quick check-in about how things have been going with your essay so far. Just as a reminder, again, this is due by Sunday at midnight. You can choose one of those three prompts. If you choose to do the get out of jail free card, if you still have it and plan to use that for the assignment, then you can turn it in as late as next Sunday with no penalty. So does anybody have questions regarding this first essay? Anything about turning it in, the rubric, anything else that I can do to help you as you're preparing or thinking about this? Okay. If questions come up later at any point, please let me know, and I'm happy to answer and go through those questions. So let's get started on some of the stuff for today. So what I'd like to do first is just do a couple of points of housekeeping. The first thing to know is that while we are meeting next Monday for that full period of time in class, we're not going to meet on February 21st. That Monday, I'll be at a conference presenting some research and work. So what it will do instead of having a meeting on that class period is I'll just post a prompt for you on Canvas that relates to the week, and then just ask you to complete and work through that. It shouldn't be a whole lot of work. It should be the amount of class time, if not a little bit less, and it'll just be designed to help. And then we'll resume on that Wednesday. Also, I apologize for the Canvas issues with getting your comments and feedback up on the reflections. You should now all be able to see the reflection comments up along with your grade. It's out of 100 points, right? Or 10% of the overall 1,000 points in your grade. If you look on the assignment, you should see under the submission, just some comments there, things that went well, things to work on. I do want to note some general trends and things that I observed in working through the reflections and things to apply and use as you gear up for your next essay. So one thing, right, is breaking up those larger paragraphs. So if it's longer than about a half page double spaced, it's a good idea to break it up into a new paragraph. Make sure, right, that you are citing from a couple articles in the class and, citing from things like the textbook in order to help and make sure that you've got that listed out clearly. When you're doing something like a quote or a pretty direct reference, make sure you're including that page number 2. There are a couple submissions where things such as the font and formatting were a little off. Make sure you use that 12-point and double-spaced font, right? I know, because I've been there as a student, where we'll use a really long heading and a lot of spaces to try to artificially inflate it to 4 pages. Please don't do that, right? I'd rather have a submission that's a little bit short than a submission that clearly is trying to stretch itself out to get there. Also, make sure to work on just some issues with punctuation and conventions. For instance, using commas to separate clauses or parts of a sentence. If you say, for instance, I went to the store, for instance, comma, I went to the store is a good way to separate that out. And make sure to work on capitalization of proper nouns. For instance, if you're using something like Snapchat or Zoom, right, those names would be proper nouns that you would use with a capital Z or capital S. So I will still look at rough drafts or outlines. If you send them to me by the end of the day today, I'm happy to give you feedback on those. I've already received a couple, and things are looking pretty good so far. So just know that that option is available for you. And I recommend, again, working through the rubric as kind of a checklist as you're working through the assignment. Again, check the assignment submission and also check the feedback you got on the reflection. That will help to directly set you up for this assignment. Again, pretty straightforward. So again, this class meeting is a little bit shorter for today. We're going to be talking a little bit more about the activity that we did last class and some of the ways that we utilize different styles and components of listening. So this week's reading, again, looks at the ways that listening shapes our overall communication. And the idea when we're listening across political and social difference that oftentimes we actually find that it's useful and strategic. So even if we find ourselves disagreeing or communicating with a perspective that's different from us, right, we're still able to learn a lot through that entire listening process. As sort of a quick recap and refresher for folks here for the first time, we went over the purpose and modes of these 4 different types of listening. So the first type, of course, is enclave listening. That's with like-minded people. So again, if you're part of a group or organization and you find yourself communicating with people that are very similar to you and share a lot of your values and beliefs, we oftentimes denigrate it as being an echo chamber or something like that, but it's actually an opportunity to build identity, build solidarity, and communication with one another. A really good example of this are support groups, including social media groups for folks that might have disabilities or mental health concerns, right? And those groups allow like-minded people to talk to each other and share experiences. For instance, there's TikToks for folks with ADHD, and there's a lot of like videos that are like, hey, you know you have ADHD when, and there's some really great ways to create shared understanding and experience through that. Alliance listening, as you all talked a little bit about last class, is the idea that there is overlap. It's like a Venn diagram. You don't necessarily share everything in common, but you do have some level of colliding interests. I used the example last class of Black Panthers and folks with disabilities leading to the ADA. Adversarial listening, it's like knowing thy enemy, listening to a perspective that you pretty strongly disagree with in one way or another, to reflect on and to create good counter strategies. Doesn't mean that we're better at listening or empathizing or changing our minds, just that we know and understand these opposing perspectives a little bit better. And then lastly, transformative listening. Again, is more about changing people's minds and convincing them on how to adjust their own perspectives on issues. Those were kind of the four major ones that we went over last class. I also had the time to do an initial look at the anonymous feedback that you all submitted so far. If you missed class on Wednesday or you haven't had the chance to turn that in, you're still welcome to do so by the end of the day today. Please get that in if you haven't already. Again, I use this to know what's going well and some things that I can adjust. Sounds like things like using group activities and prompts have definitely gone pretty well, along with creating activities that are accessible and help folks on Zoom join us in the discussion. And then one thing that I'm going to continue to work on and develop is clarity with work and some of the group assignments and prompts, just to make sure that everybody clearly knows what we're doing. Also trying to do a little bit more of some of those group activities too. And then with regard to turning around and giving feedback on assignments, a couple people brought up wanting to get those assignment pieces of feedback back sooner. And in the past, I've been waiting until everybody, including people who turned it in late, will do that. But to make things a little bit easier and more straightforward for you, I'm going to go ahead and just turn around feedback for you, even if not everybody has turned in the assignment yet, and then just wait to talk about it in class when everybody has the assignment. That way you get feedback sooner, but I'm also being fair to folks that haven't turned it in. So just making that and a couple other adjustments to the class based on your feedback. So we'll talk a little bit more about some of the challenges and issues as they relate to listening. And to start us off, I want us to return to the group activity that we did for last class. So I know this is going to be a little bit tricky because we have some people who are joining in a different way than last time. So I'm going to try to make this work the best way that I can. So we have a group over here that had Crew, Nicole, Justin, Travis. It's like most, if not all of you are here. We had another group here on this side that had Willie, Mari, Travis, Leah, Johnny. So a few of you are here. We had another group that I think submitted online that did the adversarial listening. There were a couple of people. Raise your hand if you did the adversarial listening. Okay, so we've got 3 people here. So Presley, Trevor, and Crew, you 3 are welcome to work together and return to some of the things that you noted on that. And then I know that not everybody on Zoom did the transformative listening group, but I'm going to have the folks on Zoom be tasked with transformative. So we have Enclave over here. We have the Alliance listening over here. We have the adversarial listening trio of folks. And then folks on Zoom will do transformative. And if you already worked in the group together, take just some time to refresh on what you did. or if you're in a new group, just take some time to talk a little bit about these questions. And then after you've done that refreshment and discussion, I'll ask each group to talk a little bit about their answers to these questions. Oh, yes. So if you're the enclave, yes. Yes, sorry. Yeah. Oh. Okay. Yeah. No problem. Thanks, Tucker.
Okay.
Like most groups are about ready. Does any group need more time just to share? Okay. I'll close things up for the Zoom folks as well. Awesome. So let's go around and have these different groups share. So let's start with the enclave group. Just go ahead and share your answers to these questions, some of the things we worked on last class or talked about a little bit for this class as well. Please.
So within the Marathi Gas project, we kind of mentioned that the enclave listening would refer to the individual groups involved with the project, the politicians involved, the business side, especially the landowners, all these groups talking amongst themselves, figuring out what they're going to say, kind of gathering their own support, so to speak. They don't necessarily obviously communicate well outside those groups because this is such a divisive issue.
Sure.
One of the other examples we came up with, which was kind of similar to this, was political parties. A lot of internal talks, a lot of internal debate, policy making, kind of devolves into echo chambers, very divisive again when those go into the public, so to speak.
Sure.
And the kind of strengths and weaknesses obviously is it's very easy for internal communication, very smooth to talk with like-minded people, get information across, figure out a plan, set of policies, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
The downside is as that expands and increases in scale, it devolves more or less into just isolated echo chambers.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing, Garrett. I think your group brings in some really good points here about some of the challenges and benefits of enclave listening. I like the way you bring up the role of strategy, right? That enclave listening is a chance for members of a group or people with similar perspectives to figure out the strategy or plan of attack on how to move forward or deal with an issue, right? if you're involved with some like social movement or activist organization, for instance, maybe you're advocating for paying student athletes, right? It's a good opportunity for you to work with and collaborate with other people, but the challenge might come in translating what your group comes to believe in and making a broader public be convinced or persuaded by that issue, right? So definitely the role of persuasion, changing other hearts and minds can be a really big challenge there. Let's talk about alliance listening.
So for the Narvi gas project, alliance listening was used on both sides. Includes of farmers, indigenous people, environmentalists, and people from towns or localities that are joined with alliances. These are formal alliances. The Northwest Alliance, which is a group of local and other support that are opposed to the oil and coal project in the Northwest. For number two, in politics, war, conflicts with two or more parties, alliances are often formed. When there are two groups, the enclaves will often self-order and form alliances with the side that are more closely resembling of their beliefs. In the US, there are Democrats and Republicans, and while there's a scale of left versus right beliefs, most people will choose one side that they're on, even if they're floating somewhat in the middle of both groups. For number three, strengths are connections are formed between many different groups, and people allow for smaller enclaves to make a bigger difference and amplify each other's voices. Some weaknesses are that once you choose a side and make alliances, you kind of end up with your hands tied. There may be pressure to conform and a lack of ability to share slightly differing opinions within the group.
Yeah, this is very thorough. Thanks for sharing, Trevor. So really like some of the key observations that you make about alliance listening and about how alliance listening works, right? So a few things that I think were brought up that work really well. First of all, the idea that alliance listening causes us to gravitate toward what the most similar group or perspective is to who we find ourselves agreeing with, right? This is why in general, when there is a primary campaign for somebody that's running for a seat, running for president or something similar, right? That oftentimes people will consolidate and support the candidate that gets the nomination, even if it doesn't necessarily mean it's the person they support in the primary, right? It also, right, is useful because it helps people who are dealing with conflict. I like to say behavior conflict management because oftentimes a starting point in conflict management is to find those points of similarity. What do you share with the other person? What is this thing that you have alliance with that allows you to work through and solve areas where the group members are different? So there's definitely a lot there in how alliance listening lets people work together and have opportunities for collaboration. Let's hear from the adversarial listening group.
Adversarial listening for the Narvi Gas Project talked about how some of the gas companies are monitoring anti-gas project Facebook groups, just monitoring the amount of followers and support they're getting against their gas project. This is like the adversarial listening is very common, as they stated within the US as well, just like going to different rallies or gatherings, basically different political parties or different organizations. And it's good to know, understanding the enemy, but a weakness of it too is always thinking enemy, not really trying to find a middle ground as well.
Right. Good observations here. I really like the way you bring in that specific example from the article about the ways things like Facebook groups and like other organizations get monitored, right? Sometimes you get a visitor or somebody that's included who, is really trying to take notes and figure out what's going on. Depending on the group you're part of, right, you could create rules about who can be a member. Is it relatively open, or do you restrict membership to people that you trust that are on the inside? Sometimes we get anxious, right? A double agent or somebody that really is supporting the other side on an issue. I also like, as you brought up, adversarial listening oftentimes does cause us to focus on, listening for strategy, listening to respond, listening to disagree. And it definitely does make it difficult to create compromise because, again, you're listening because you're trying to report or bring data back to about a group that you oppose. So that definitely means that the intent of that group's organization can create some problems. And I know the transformative folks, some of you might have been tasked with this category for the first time, although I think there's a couple of you that did this last class. So go ahead and share a little bit about what you noticed in regards to transformative listening, the way that it can be used.
All right, so I'll take it for the team. So transformative, we used how they change people's point of view on how of their own opinion to bring more people involved in knowing what's going on about the natural gas in Australia, to make them agree or disagree about their natural gas is happening in their own land. But also they use like social media being part of a big help of the idea to convince people between what's right or wrong, to make them switch sides of like a presidential debate that's going on with a transformative with the natural gas.
Yeah, so I appreciate you sharing. I think you kind of hit on a lot of the key ideas here of transformative listening, that it is very much trying to focus again on convincing the broader public, using things like social media and networked communication as a way of getting the broader public to listen to or understand an issue. You know, thinking about our use of recent social media and mass media, right? We use a lot of digital activism, hashtag campaigns, the circulation of videos and things that have gone viral, right? And those types of efforts of like broader social listening have definitely been interesting things to see in action. As kind of an interesting like pop culture example. Anybody here watch Futurama? A couple of you? Yeah, so there's this whole thing that started because it's an animated show. It's pretty good, but they're bringing, Hulu just announced that they're reviving it, but one of the major voice actors is like going to be recast and isn't included. And there's been like this major outcry and fan campaign that's trying to bring the original voice actor back, right? And it's really interesting to see that there's this like very large public response, right? That people are trying to use this kind of transformative listening in a pop culture context. People do that with a lot of media they feel strongly about, but people also do it in the context of social movements, activism, and other things too. I brought up before that campaigns like hashtag #CryptoVote are other examples of how people have tried to raise awareness about accessibility in polling places in the United States and that type of thing. But it's interesting to see the way that like people like fans, the broader public, organizations, and so on will try to create this like broader public campaign or effort, even through the use of things like crowdfunding campaigns to sort of fund and guide things as well. And this also ties back to our discussion earlier about the ways that organizations and businesses might listen, right? Or not, but the idea that listening is difficult to measure, but that organizations benefit from listening, including the ways that it happens online. So what I want you to do now is returning to these groups that you talked through and work with. You're a member now of a nonprofit or an advocacy group. You can choose which this group is. You're welcome to brainstorm or maybe even make one up. I mentioned, you know, an organization or a group that's advocating for paying college athletes or something, you know, like that would be an example of some type of group. And then what I want you to do is thinking about what this group might be. I want you to think about how you could use one of those 4 forms of listening to understand and engage, either through enclave listening, hear similar perspectives, or different perspectives through some of the other forms of listening too. So think about what this organization or group might be and how you can use your signed listening style to engage with them. So I will get the breakout room going for Zoom folks, and then have everybody else return to the groups or partnerships they worked on earlier.
In this situation,
It'll work.
It'll work, I like it.
It will.
Plan. But so like.
So before we get
A lot of conversation, probably figure
the purpose is to get support from, I guess, CAA schools. And they would get support from people who work on it, that we're usually not for.
Okay, yeah.
emphasis on the personal conversation.
So like some like so our.
So I guess doing that, that's good.
So who would be that listed?
Yeah, actually, find out purpose and goals. So like, the goal for the like how that was like start.
Yeah. Technically, or
Somebody put that.
you bring a child student athlete, earn their tuition to a full ride, pretty much.
Yeah.
So.
So, yeah. Find some conversation. But. So.
So yeah, we would listen to all the new big deliberations coming out. All the people saying our potential prices affordable healthcare supplies and stuff,
Non-revenue.
and then maybe even like
Non-revenue.
Yeah.
to help legitimize them. Yeah, why is it? Make use those points to make count.
Yeah.
So like that's what try to get some kind of recommendation like that. How do you say those systems understand why we do so much work?
Yeah, just the one just add this.
Sure. For legally, so probably trying to sue you. Or right, because I associate administrational listening with aggression. But aggression is high yield, but it's also high consequence. Like if you're trying to gain information through aggression, through lying and stuff, chances are you're going to get some direct results. But in contrast to that, the other groups could be that.
CAA will want to do that with the bakers, however, not on the interest of some athletes might get to change their mind.
In this case,
Yeah.
it's more so just high yield information minus the aggression from the other side, just like legally. That's
Yeah.
Like groups are making some good progress, so I'll give you a bit more time.
Yeah, so. Yeah, I was on that
Okay, so go ahead and wrap up what your group is currently working on or talking about. We'll be ready to have somebody share. All right. So let's go the other direction this time and start with the folks on Zoom. So go ahead and share the group that you selected and then how your group would use this type of listening.
So the nonprofit that my group chose was it's basically one that's directed towards protecting national parks from major gas and oil companies.
Okay.
And basically it's just to protect important historical monuments, you know, like hieroglyphics and just important historical buildings. And then for the second question, our form of listening was transformative listening, and we just said that what we could do is basically just ask people like, oh, would you rather see historical monuments, or would you rather have people come in and destroy these with, you know, inserting gas pipes into them? So that was kind of one way. And then another way is just like bringing awareness to the importance of historical monuments, maybe like on social media or through like a newspaper or something, because I think a lot of people just don't realize how important historical monuments can be.
Yeah, definitely relevant example, right? And one that connects really well to the reading for this week. I like the idea that you bring up of raising awareness or making people, understand something that they don't otherwise have information about. This idea of inserting thoughts or concerns into the public consciousness is definitely a really major strategy that's used in transformative listening to make people aware of or focus on things that they wouldn't otherwise. So good work in explaining and talking about that. Let's hear from the group here.
So our nonprofit, it's like a health organization nonprofit that's goal is to like help the people get affordable and free healthcare, medicine, treatment, and aid in pretty much all fields surrounding the medical world. So, and we had adversarial listening, so we would probably actively be monitoring and looking into like the big pharma companies and the big healthcare providers. And so we would be monitoring how they're like making prices like way too high or just artificially making prices, while also looking into how they're like lobbying with the government, who's pretty much allowing them to do it. And then from that information, we bring it back and use the findings to not only like spread the awareness in our organization, but maybe get like public to understand, get like enough outcry to maybe influence change and whatnot.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing, crew. You know, one easy way to figure out maybe opposing groups is follow the money, right? Who is funding or supporting groups or organizations that you disagree with. So I really like the way that you might list out some of the organizations or groups that you would target. That's a strategy that a lot of nonprofits and companies would do, is to highlight and target those specific groups that they know that they need to work against and find out information about the Alliance Group.
Yeah, so we said, we just went with the student athletes being paid idea. So for the goals and purpose, the goals student athletes receive payment for their services that would be earned through scholarships and eventually get to a full ride. The NCAA has a lot of money, and those powerhouse schools can easily be grouped with the NAIA to spread around enough wealth, especially like revenue sports like football and basketball and sports where you're making an extra 100 million per money you're spending, basically. And the NCAA probably wouldn't want to do that because small NAIAs like UU doesn't get the same representation and exposure that schools like Michigan or Ohio State will. But the common interest of a student athlete might get them to change their minds due to students who would refuse to play under the regulations that NCAA is providing. Students who refuse to play can also become an important group to negotiate with because their lack of power, other legal measurements like unions can be persuaded to aid because there's a lot of student athletes who are under the age of 21.
Yeah, really good examples here, Trevor, of really not only identifying some of the reasons and incentives to pay student athletes, but also thinking about the way that different organizations could be potential allies and people to work with in shared interests, but also ones that probably might not be the best choices, right? That oftentimes one organizations or groups are going to think about the interests or goals of organizations to determine if they're a good fit and figure out who to reach out to in a kind of collaborative capacity for sure. And then the on-plan.
So we did student athletes being paid as well, but I would say we did it from like a smaller perspective because we are NAIA athletes are like 5 months, right? And basically, if you look at the Division I, there's a lot of endorsement deals being made right now for name, image, likeness, and that can be used at a smaller scale. With like local businesses being represented by student athletes at Eastern, and that would be a good way to start it and partnering up with them. And basically, for the second one, we would engage in conversation with all of them, but if they weren't willing to, we would still listen to like what they're saying, but like we would have our say.
Sure. Thanks, Willie. I really like that you bring in, yes, there's shared experience, but also that you're creating a setting in which people can freely express their opinion or share their concerns too, right? One issue that we talk a lot about in conflict management and small group communication is the issue of groupthink, right? The idea that when you're a member of a group with what you think are similar views, that you'll self-censor or not allow for opposing views to be heard. So one challenge is we think we're in an enclave, but we might not have everybody on the same page. There might be disagreement there. So you do want there to be openness for people to share views where they don't always agree, right? Oftentimes we feel like pressure to conform and to agree, even if we don't agree ourselves. So creating that open space is definitely really important. I'm glad you bring up that concern. So really good ideas here in regards to how we can use these types of listening. Again, engaging with social and political issues can oftentimes feel challenging because it doesn't always feel like we're listening or understanding each other. But I think breaking down these 4 different types of listening and their goals and purposes helps us to understand how we communicate both within and across divides, and also how organizations and groups use these forms of listening on a really regular basis. So again, this is all kind of relevant to how organizations and groups actually behave in terms of listening. So to wrap up for today, and again, I mentioned I try to get us out a few minutes early for today. We talked a little bit about these different 4 types of listening. Also the way that listening engages with some of these social and political issues, like the nonprofits or groups selected, and some of the limits and boundaries of good listening as well. For next class, we're going to get into listening in the context of race. It's a challenging but important topic, and I think one that will allow us to think about race as it relates to culture, identity, communication, and listening to it. So go ahead and pass forward or email me your group activity if you haven't done so already. You're welcome to hang on to future individual questions for today to help you plan. Have a great rest of your week. Enjoy the weekend, and I will see you next Monday.